Kelly says it started as a storybook romance.
Devin and I met when I was 19 years old at a Christian summer camp in Mississippi.
Sparks flew for the camp counselors.
I think it was like the third night we knew each other. We stayed up until 5 o'clock in the morning talking.
They couldn't get enough of each other.
And that pretty much continued throughout the summer. And by the end of the summer, we were talking like all day, every day, like just kind of constantly checking in.
Summer ended, but...
And we dated long distance for a while. Then we eventually got married.
And happily ever after?
We were married for 4.5 years total.
Not really happily ever after.
I knew from the very beginnings of knowing him that he had received an OCD diagnosis when he was like 14 or 15 years old, and that he had a lot of sort of stimming adjacent behaviors, things that he would do, like sort of ritualistic things that he would do. I didn't know that what that had actually been was a form of conversion therapy that he had been deeply immersed in for most of his adolescence.
Cut to 4.5 years into their marriage. Kelly and Devin are living in Chicago, where she's pursuing a PhD in queer theory. All her friends are gay men. They go out to gay bars.
And I still didn't fully recognize kind of what was going on with Devin.
Eventually, she did. Welcome to In This Family, presented by Nexus Family Healing. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray, President and CEO. Kelly Foster Lundquist is an English teacher in the Twin Cities. She's the author of Beard, a Memoir of a Marriage. It was the winner of the 2026 Minnesota Book Award for Memoir and Creative Nonfiction and has received rave reviews. Today, Kelly, who grew up in a religious family in Mississippi, is married to Ben, her second husband, and they have a 12-year-old daughter. Kelly and her first husband, Devin, remain good friends. The title of Kelly's book, Beard, is a term for someone who acts as a romantic partner for someone trying to conceal their sexual identity. But if you talk to Kelly, you'll realize real relationships and real people can be more complicated than that. Kelly and Devin did love each other. They were sexually active, and both of them spent many years believing Devin was straight. Kelly Foster Lundquist, it is so wonderful to have you on In This Family. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I think it's really important for people to try to understand how they find themselves in this situation. Married to somebody who is gay. Can you explain, how did you and Devin end up in that situation as you now have dissected and deconstructed that?
So, there are these kind of parallel forms of Christian culture that he and I kind of came up in. One was, for me, it was purity culture, right? So it was sexual purity culture, which sort of is very much connected with diet culture. And there's all these sort of like layers of how that manifests in a gendered way for, different people. And for him, this sort of strand of purity culture that was conversion therapy. And like there was these two kind of, interconnected things. One form of that was you don't just date, like you don't just casually date a lot of people. You certainly don't sleep with a lot of people. You don't, kiss, experiment, like any of that stuff. Like that is very much like kind of verboten, like you don't do that. One of the sort of offshoots of that is a sort of serial monogamy that ends up happening very early on. Like a lot of people, just early marriage. I was 21 when we got married. Another thing is just kind of rushing that along, because you're like, well, the only thing this can lead to, like, we are so close to each other. We love each other so much, we are so much happier when we are together than when we are apart. Like that must be what this is. And I think not really having any other model for what that could look like kind of made it impossible to imagine that we wouldn't get married. And I think there's also just the element of reassurance, right? Like for him, I think that he did love me. I loved him. Like we really did actually were in love with each other in a way, right? And that way was as sexual as it was anything else. Like we had a pretty like healthy, fairly regular sex life. So which is another, way that I was able to, for myself, to kind of postpone my own knowing of things, because it was like, well, in my head, I had this incredibly binary, very oversimplified view of sexuality generally and all of that, no perspective of like fluidity or any of that, kind of thing. Or that, honestly, even an understanding that like men can have sex even if they don't really like someone, like it's not necessarily like this thing where it's always like so deeply connected. And so I didn't have that like underpinning. And so for me, it was like, well, we're having sex, so he's not gay. And that's kind of what that was like as far as it went for me for a while.
You know what? Let's lean in on that part a little bit, because
Yeah,
that
sure.
that might be confusing to a lot of people. Again, probably more so our generation than the younger
Sure.
generations, because they do understand the fluidity a little bit more.
Sure.
But people in our generation are like, yeah, see, they must be choosing it. If he could have sex with you as a woman, why does that make him gay if he can do that?
I think he and I both had ways of detaching from our bodies, right? Of like disassociating and kind of, shutting that down. And that's been a lifelong struggle for me. Like I'm super cerebral, the only way that I know how to feel is to think about my feelings, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I think I do feel that. I'm always like a step removed from my feelings. And how that looked for him as it regards, sex, was it took him a full month after I had left him, like I was gone, for his therapist to get him to even admit, I think this is sexual for you. Like I think you actually are sexually attracted to men. And, since we've divorced, he has not one time ever gone out with another woman. Like he's only, that's entirely like where his heart is, where his like body is, like all of that is like very much in that camp.
So does he?
Squarely.
So does he clearly identify himself as gay now?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, very much. Yeah. Out, good, all of that.
Okay, so you've seen these cachets. You knew a little
Mhm.
bit about him before you guys got married, not the full extent of the conversion therapy. You didn't find that out until later.
Yeah.
First of all, what were the other signs that you missed that he was gay? And then the follow-up question would be, why do you think you missed those?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's interesting, right? Because I think that by the time I met him, he was 20, I was 19. He had been, like a lot of, queer kids and, other kids from marginalized backgrounds or, identities. He had been severely bullied, in middle school, especially, and even a bit in high school. And I think he had so overcorrected his self presentation, um, that he didn't present in the way that I sort of was taught to, again, in my extremely oversimplified, perspective on how sexuality like manifested, right? He didn't present like, I think like, the kind of classic, TV characters like Jack from Will and Grace, right? He didn't have that kind of like flamboyant, sort of, or like, two snaps in a circle from In Living Color. Like he didn't have that kind of presentation of his personality. There was nothing, inherently effeminate, about him. And those are all words, right, that I wouldn't use now. But I think that's kind of like what I was taught to be like, a gay man looks like this, and like, for instance, my brother, bless his beautiful heart, has forgiven me for this. But like when he came out, my brother's gay. And when he came out to me about 10 months after my divorce, even after all I knew, all I had learned, all the study, I mean, literally like doctoral level study of sexuality that I had done, the third thing that I said to my sweet brother when he came out to me was, but you've never said anything mean about my clothes. Like as if that, like, I was like, I don't know how true this is. Cause my brother's a bear and he's like not into that. He's so much more into video games. My brother would wear like wrinkled jeans out of the house and Devin would never, like he would never. But so having said that though, that sort of like meticulousness or whatever that is often sort of like meticulousness, preoccupation with an aesthetic or, self-presentation in that way. I mean, I think those are things that are sort of historically linked to a certain type of gay man, right? And I think that was Devin did sort of fulfill some of those things, but a lot of those things, the meticulousness, the sort of scrupulosity, all of that kind of stuff is also an OCD thing, right? So there's also compulsiveness related to that. Like he ironed every piece of clothing he wore ever. Like the man literally ironed his undershirts,
Oh my.
So and we had just an ironing board just out at all times, like in our bedroom. Like there was just always an iron, like ready to go, starched, like all of it, like it was just like right there, locked and loaded, to the point where I still won't iron things. I have a steamer now, like one of those sort of like
Yes.
portable steamers, and that's the extent that I can do. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's like a, delayed, trauma reaction or what, but I'm just like, nope, I'm never ironing anything ever again. I refuse.
So it really sounds like, from what I'm hearing, is that like there's this combination that's happening, being both of you being raised in a high demand religious beliefs, with the
Hmm.
purity culture, with him not fitting all the or at least not presenting, when as he got older, all the stereotypes that people think of, and even the stereotypes of how we express our sexuality that we were just talking about, right? Like
Right.
you
Yeah.
guys had an active sex life, so that's a stereotype again of that should have been one of my sign. So easy to miss all of that, and just not appreciating. You guys were seeing this as his OCD, as just him trying to figure out who he is without it necessarily taking the name of something. And
Exactly.
he
Yeah.
was not identifying himself as gay either. So
Absolutely.
it
Yeah.
wasn't like he purposely knew something and was purposely hiding it from you. He was as out of touch with that, it sounds like, as you were for him.
One of the things that I wanted the book to speak to was that there's this trope of the beard in popular culture, and we don't talk about it a lot. SNL, had the girl with no gaydar, right? Like that. I watched that with Devin for the first the night that you premiered, that sketch. Um, and she's always like walking into like a gay bar, like a literal gay bar with like men in like rhinestone dog collars and, kind of like, mesh bodysuit, like the whole, very much, sort of like stereotypical presentation, and being like, there's so many cute available guys here, and she's just like dumb, right? I mean, that's kind of how she comes across as like the dumbest dumb girl in Dumbland, and the flip side of that, right, is that it presumes the legibility of sexuality on gay men's bodies, right? That it presents in that way, that they're so easy to read, that how could you, stupid girl, possibly miss this, and so it flattens both. And that's what, to a certain extent, comedy just flattens everyone, right? That's how that functions. But I always found it, incomplete, and obviously insulting because I'd had that experience, but also just, yeah, I was like, this doesn't tell a human story. Like, this is not really how this happens. And by, amplifying or dialing up the stupidity of this woman, then you negate the complexity of people, but also of sexuality. Like you kind of flatten that in a way that I don't think you're intending to, but it makes it very like binary. And I think that my own sort of contending with my perception of myself as like sort of fitting those, tropes, was hard, like just for me as a person, like, yeah. So in a way that I think we just, our brains hunger for patterns and categories and like ways to understand our stories and narrative that sort of like explains those things. And I think that was among the things that, that writing the book helped me kind of identify for myself, and sort of like, expurgate, like kind of get through it.
Yeah. In society in general, it's not safe to come out as gay, particularly back when he was an adolescent and he was already experiencing a lot of bullying. So it wasn't safe for him.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
you
Yeah.
layer on top of that the religious beliefs and upbringing. Did that play a big role in his not getting in touch with who he really was?
Absolutely. So the therapist who he saw for his entire life was very much involved at Oral Roberts University. So he's from a town called Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, which is a suburb of Tulsa. And Broken Arrow specifically is home to multiple places that are sort of associated with what we would call the prosperity gospel, right? So Oral Roberts was very much, a part of that, where this sort of, underlying premise of prosperity gospel is if you are faithful and you do the correct things, God blesses you, right? Like that's, how, and now, like God blesses you now, not like later in heaven, but like literally now you would become rich, the health and wealth gospel, right? Is sometimes what it's also called. And so Oral Roberts is a part of that. Rhema Bible Institute, also a part of that. There were several, sort of associated. It's sort of like the American epicenter, essentially, of that view of Christianity. And the church that he attended was very much kind of in that vein. Like, going to that church with him multiple times, I heard the pastor was sort of like, 5-point PowerPoint sermon where it's like, you can choose to be happy, you can choose to be blah, blah, blah. Like it's very much that thing. And so you hear that your whole life, and sort of what you see yourself as then is this kind of tabula rasa, like blank slate, like I can craft myself into whatever I want to be. And so I think honestly, like that idea of conversion was very much a thematic thing that I wanted to address, because I think we were both invested in that project in different ways. So for me, it was like I can craft my body into this ideal thing. I can craft my personality and my presentation into this ideal thing. I can be this thing, and there's a kind of hopefulness, right? That kind of hopefulness we all feel, I think, like when we make a New Year's resolution and we're like, this year I'm going to be amazing, like I'm going to go to the Container Store and everything is going to fit and my storage room is going to be organized and, like all of those things, right? I'm going to know where every spice is and, I'm never going to buy lettuce that goes bad in the crisper drawer. Like all of those things, there's a kind of like innate hopefulness in that. And I wanted to kind of capture that too, I think, in the relationship, because we both kind of felt like we get to make this whatever we want it to be, right? We can sort of like by the dent of our will, our willpower can kind of get us there. And I think that there was a kind of like joyfulness and hopefulness in that, in the midst of just the sort of like messed upness of all of that too, the undercurrent of that like darker tide kind of pulling us out.
This is really what relates to the cognitive dissonance. And
Yes.
cognitive dissonance is a powerful thing that many people go through as they're trying to find themselves, what's on the table and what's not on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And when, through years of that way of thinking that you can be who you want, it's not inherent to who you are. You can choose it, you can create it, you can make it happen. That is going to feed that cognitive dissonance of, okay, I'm going to choose who I want and I'm going to disavow who I really am.
Abs, 1,000,000%.
And
Yeah.
then I'm going to find reasons for who I really am to fit into this cognitive dissonance narrative that I've created for myself because it's safer, because that's what's being reinforced, all of those things. So that's really what you guys were really dealing with here.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's go back to the conversion therapy. A lot of people won't know what that is. So can you quickly explain what conversion therapy is?
Essentially, it's just this theory of a way to remove or get rid of or manage. I mean, I don't know really the correct word for what they would call same-sex attraction, right? And so SSA is often an abbreviation you'll hear coming from someone who's kind of coming from that background. False images is another phrase that just means sort of like these ideas they're not real, right? And so, specifically in the instance of my ex-husband, like what he was told, his therapist used what are considered fairly still like, recognized forms of therapy for OCD. So things like aversion therapy, or, if you're afraid that not clicking the light 17 times is going to make you have a car accident, then you don't click the light and you see what happens, right? And you don't have a car accident. So you're like, okay, maybe I don't have to click that light. And so the way that it looked like for him was you have this fear that you're gay, right? Well, look at a naked man's body online. And then you realize, oh, I'm not gay. Like that's, I mean, the logic of it is a little, more hard to sort of like, make linear and all that. But if you're desperate to prove to yourself that that's not who you are. So that belief, anyway, all of those fears, his doctor would call false images. Like these are not real. These are not these desires that you have. And the way that he justified that, or the sort of context that he would put that in, is God doesn't make gay people. Gay is not real. It is a made up thing. It's a pretend thing. So you can't be it because it's not real. So in the same way that, in the sort of Christian parlance, he would say the devil is lying to you about your fear about, you're not going to drown because you didn't tap the boat 4 times or whatever. That's not real. And being gay, he tried to sort of frame that in the same category. And so, I mean, you want to talk about cognitive dissonance or gaslighting or, any of those sort of like things. It's just like, yeah, if you're trying to kind of like link that part of yourself with these other fears, right? And you've known those fears to be not real, right? Then why wouldn't you, by that same logic, apply this other part of yourself that you don't want to have be real? So I think it's complicated, but honestly, it's complicated because it doesn't it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. And a lot of the people who were sort of initially responsible for kind of creating sort of old school conversion therapy have left that altogether. Have apologized. Have all sorts of things have happened.
Yeah, and I want to add that many forms of conversion therapy would actually apply electric shocks to patients as they viewed images of same sex attraction. This practice has been widely discredited in the mental health community, thank goodness, and has been banned for minors in many states and remains highly controversial. So it sounds like there became a point in time where you realize, okay, you found out that he had been engaging in relationships outside the marriage. You were
Hmm.
seeing sort of these things on the computer. You were
Hmm.
questioning him about it. He was still saying, no, 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 I'm not gay. I want to stay in this marriage. At what point did you come to the realization that you two were just enabling each other by staying together?
The night after Halloween, we had gone out with some friends, and someone came up to the table where we were sitting and, started talking to my ex-husband and said, I saw you out with someone the other night. And my friend Nick, who was sitting next to me, saw the person coming and turned my chair away from the conversation so I wouldn't hear it because he could anticipate, okay, I know what this is about to be, and I don't want her to have to hear this. I want to protect her from this. And so he sort of shifted me away. But the end result of that was I didn't hear the entire conversation because we were in a bar and it was loud and it was, Saturday night and all that. So, as we were walking home, I started asking him, I was like, that didn't feel great. Like, I don't know what that was. Like, can you tell me more about what that was? And he tried to explain it away, but then it just kind of kept, not quite making sense. And I would kind of poke at it and poke at it and poke at it. And he was also, I mean, what had happened was he had fallen in love with someone else, right? So he was actually finally like ready to like have a relationship with someone who wasn't me. And I think that that's what accelerated this so rapidly. But he started staying out all night. He started, it just was miserable. It was miserable for both of us. So over the course of that 6 weeks, we were just trying to kind of work out, okay, what do we do now? Do we stay together? And he would still kind of beg me to stay, but then he would like go out that same night. Like, I don't know what you want. Like, I don't understand like what, and I don't want to know what I want. My God, like I had no idea what I wanted. And eventually what happened was I was just absolutely miserable. I went to my friend Nick's apartment to watch Angels in America, which premiered on December 3rd. And I watched that. There was a character I was absolutely unprepared to see who was a beard, Mary Louise Parker, in her role in that. And I just got shattered by that. It just moved me so much, but it also just felt like so naked. Like, oh shit, this is what's happening to me. Like, this is like seeing that mirrored on television was just more than I could handle.
So that was like the eye opener. It was like,
Oh,
whoa,
absolutely.
I'm
It's like,
watching
no,
my
this
life.
is
Yeah.
this is me. This is me. And so that night we came back to our apartment after having watched that. Um, and I was finally, because the way that he had been talking about this person he was in love with was, this is a straight guy. We go to, regular sports bars, that aren't gay bar, because all we had been doing in Boys Town was going to gay bars with my friends, like that's like, it had been our life for a while. And, and that's how it was positioned to me. And so we, we went home, didn't really talk, fell asleep. I had a dream about my grandfather who had been dead for about 7 years at that point. And in the dream, my grandfather was like, this is going to be hard for a while, but you're going to be okay. And for whatever reason, I was just like, okay, I'm ready to like say this thing out loud because I know it. Like I knew he was in love with this person and I knew that the person wasn't straight. And I had seen enough stuff between them that was like, okay, this is not, he's not straight, but I hadn't, it's like, I think it was the same for him as like that thing of if you say it, you conjure it, like you finalize it. And I think that that's what part of what the fear was, right? And I loved him. I mean, that's the thing, like that was my best friend. Like that was my person. Like we were in the midst of all of that, like same sense of humor, same engine, like all of that kind of stuff. And you're just so bound to that person at that point. And there's so much codependency and dysfunction and all of that, and you're going to lose all of that when you name it. And so I think that there was so much invested in prolonging that when I said it, I just said like, I woke up and he was awake. He was crying. I woke up crying because it was my grandfather, and I just said like, he's not straight and he just said no. And so I was a smoker at the time. I grabbed some cigarettes. I went outside. I think I was out there for a couple hours and it was December in Chicago and I had flip-flops and a parka on. And that was, I had like underwear and a t-shirt underneath it, it was nuts. But, I couldn't be in the room with him anymore. And we didn't have a car. I wasn't going to get on the train in that outfit, but I just needed to be away from him. And so, I went outside and smoked for a while and I sort of had this really the only epiphany that I feel like I've ever had in my life that felt like some sort of like, and it may have just been the result of like a whole pack of cigarettes or something, but I heard this voice or just this awareness and it just said he tried. And that for whatever reason in that moment was this massive shift because suddenly the entire history of our relationship was reframed. He had been all along killing himself to try to be the person that he was. And I could see it suddenly. It was like having this kind of like this lens, this filter taken off of the camera or something. But just this, sudden awareness that had been the nature of our relationship, that he was trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. And he failed, but how hard he had been trying, and I think that was the pivot point for me. And so I, knowing that, I ran upstairs and just recognized I was like, we have to stop. Like, we have to stop this. Like, you're going to die if you keep doing this. And so will I. I'm dying, like, too.
That's really powerful. And I'm so glad that you received those small gifts from, your inspirations and however you frame that, because it's what breaks the cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you described so well, he was doing everything that people and what the religious and society was saying and what his conversion therapy was trying to teach him. He was putting it all to practice. Getting married in a heterosexual relationship, being in a heterosexual relationship, doing all these things. He was trying so hard and it wasn't working. All that stuff wasn't working. And it didn't shift until the cognitive dissonance kind of went away of saying, no, this is who he is. And we need to be true to that and go down that road, as scary as it would be. Heartbreaking for you, heartbreaking for him, but also scary for him.
Oh, 1,000,000%. I mean, and honestly, like, I think that has shaped so much of my relationship to him after all of this, because I think that, speaking of like pre-existing narratives, right? I think that we have this, I have so many friends who are divorced and have had very different, relationships than the one that I had. And often, there's this perception that, okay, there's a person who's been unfaithful, had an affair or whatever. And then there's a person who just got blindsided by it, right? There's often that sort of like narrative. And to some extent, ours, that was what happened, Um, and what happens with those people is that the person who was unfaithful, everybody is like, that's a terrible person, bad, boo, we cut him off. He's exiled, he's out. And then the person who, was harmed by it, they think, or the victim of that, is like, everybody feels sorry for her. Oh, you sweet baby, you're so pretty, like people were bringing me like all these like flowers and chocolates and sweet stuff. And I needed it. I mean, I needed people to be kind. I mean, I was, I was heartbroken. I was
Yeah.
so sad. Um, but at the same time, because of the way that I was received and also just the relief of not having to be in that constant sort of cortisol overload place every day of just constant hypervigilance and adrenaline
And
overload
denial. You're
and yes,
describing an
absolutely.
overflooding sense of
Yeah,
denial. It takes a lot of
absolutely.
energy.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, just to try to make things make sense, right? To sort of have what doesn't make sense. There's a certain, yeah, you're just in this state of like fog all the time. And so the relief of not having to do that anymore was so profound that my life almost immediately began to be better. Like it just the night and day difference between trying to stay in that relationship and then being on the other side of it was, massive for me. But for him, suddenly, like, he couldn't come out to his family, and his family never has accepted him. Like, that's never happened, and
Oh,
so that's unfortunate, but that's
so
just the
sorry.
reality of his life. Um, and so he had this one person who it turns out was not a great guy that he had fallen in love with, and that was it. Like,
Ah,
that was it. He didn't have me anymore.
yeah.
And that's, and I mean, we had friends who were lovely to him and tried their best, but they were also mad at him, like for on my behalf. I mean, there was just an element of why couldn't you have told her sooner? Why couldn't you have been honest? Like, why did you treat her like this? Because she deserved better than that. And, so there was like all of those pieces too. And so he was very much alone, very much isolated, having to try to process all of this. And fortunately, he had a great therapist and
Good.
has continued to find people and now has his people, and that's great. But he was in a process of really having to do sort of the found family thing of just like, I'm going to have to reinvent what community looks like. Whereas I fell into one that I already had. Like my parents were wonderful, my brothers were wonderful. I had, friends show up for me and extended family and, all of that. And so, because I just moved back home with my mom and dad, I dropped out. I never did finish my PhD. But, it was like, I was writing a dissertation about Walt Whitman's Bowery masculinity, and it's like, I can't do this. Or I can't do Foucault right now. I can't with this.
So then I also kind of want to ask you, in what ways was you staying in the relationship and kind of being in denial about who Devin really was and what he really needed? How was that also meeting your needs or benefiting you? Have you ever reflected back on that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't like change. I don't. And so I think, I didn't want to lose that, and I can remember honestly, like one of the things that was very hard for me the day that I left. Like my friend Matt, who's dear, and I still am, friends with, but he took me to Midway Airport so that I could, leave. Like he helped carry my bags on the L and we got to Midway and I was just walking, around Midway and there was a cardboard cutout of a CNN anchor that I knew that Devin liked. And there was just this, for whatever reason, that was just like, oh, I'm never gonna talk to him about that person again. Like we're never going to watch that show together. We're never going to make a joke about something that person said. Like there's never going to be that shared association again. And I can remember like when my grandfather died, I was staying with my grandmother in the weeks after that, and it was a Saturday night and Lawrence Welk came on. And it was the first time I saw her cry since he had died. And for whatever reason, she just realized she was like, I'm never going to watch this with him again. Like, he's never going to be around for that. And that was the thing that kind of undid her. And so it was little things like that just like made that. So all of that to say, like, I think that was what was invested in it. It was just like, I don't want to never have those things. I don't want to have to say goodbye to that, the things that are sweet and funny and dear and, familiar.
Were there certain things that you did to help get over the fact the loss and the grief of the relationship
Yeah.
ending, and not knowing you're not going to have those experiences with somebody who you really
Yes.
love.
I think it honestly helped, like, kind of honestly on that same thread, that there were people that I sort of had crushes on relatively quickly. And it's not that I wanted to actually have a relationship with those people. It's just like, just to even have a little bit of like a little frisson of like
Yes.
excitement about anyone else is like, okay, well maybe I can move on from, and it makes you feel, honestly, even kind of similar to that like New Year's resolution feeling of like, okay, things could be different. Like this doesn't always have to be like this. Like there might be, and I'll say too, really, like there were other very practical things. Like I made lists. I was like, okay, I can go do this. I memorized the like capitals of all the countries in the world. I just did like weird things that just made me feel like myself. Like I
Yeah.
watched movies that I wanted to watch. I read books that I had wanted to read. I went walking with my parents every night. I had these little rituals that I kind of built in that were, coping rituals, but were very comforting and sort of grounding to me. I made sure to see my friends. My brothers were lovely and came home from college to hang out with me. And we went, and got Mexican food and went to the movies and, just did stuff that felt normal and fun. And my parents would watch, TV at night often and would often watch the same shows, just kind of like comforting thing. I took trips. I worked at a camp. I taught English in Slovakia. I did things that were like, I couldn't have done this before in my like adult married life where I'm with a person and we're, building a family and all of that. And now I can, like, suddenly I can do whatever I want. And so I tried to kind of, as intentionally as I could, reframe it in that way. And that was sort of how that, recovery was possible. And I went to therapy a lot, a lot, a lot.
That's great. Those are all really great examples of things to do when you are leaving a relationship and trying to grieve that. And the most important thing that I hear you highlighting is all of those things was about you finding out who you are.
Oh,
It
absolutely.
was
Yeah.
about you learning, like, who am I? How am I authentic to myself? Because you now have to, after a marriage ends, people need to go through that process of
Hmm.
re-examining who they are, finding out who they are, because now you're separate from this relationship and now it can be about you. And those are
Hmm.
great things to do to help with that loss and grief.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, absolutely.
so I imagine from your experiences and stories, Devin's gay, you guys aren't really in touch with this, you're married, it's a otherwise great relationship. Um, And I can't help but think of the parallel how your whole world during this time period is about gayness. So,
Yeah.
like, you're married to someone who's gay that you guys aren't in touch with, or, it's not being authentically expressed. You've moved into Boys Town in Chicago, which
Hmm.
is a queer community.
Hmm.
You're studying all about
Hmm.
boys and queerness and boy
Hmm.
relationships, and like how do you make sense of that your whole world was about this, yet the relationship wasn't authentic about the fact that Devin was gay?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's funny because even after writing the book, right, even after digging into all of that for so many years and, taking as long as it took to finish the book, like, I don't have a good answer, honestly. Like, I think that I don't have one answer, I guess I should say. I do have answers, but I don't have a single answer. I think that there are elements of wanting to accelerate the end, like subconsciously, I think, like kind of wanting to be like, okay, let's do this. Like, let's come, like, let's face the thing, let's talk about this. Let's move this on. And then I also think there was an element of wanting Devin to find people who had also been bullied for the same things as him and see that, like exercise his own shame and, kind of work through that and his fear and his guilt and like all of those things, like, or embarrassment, all of that, like, come to home in himself, and of course, I think there was an element, honestly, I mean, I kind of like talk about this in the book, but I think there was an element of me doing sort of a weird form of conversion therapy on him too, because it was like, you see this, here we are. Is this what you want to be? That kind of thing too, which is gross, but I mean, probably pretty honest for where I was at the time. Because I didn't want him to not end up with me, of course. Like I wanted him to end up with me. I wanted that to be the foregone conclusion of all of this. Um, but then I think there was also just an element of for myself, like this was like this existed before Devin. Like I was a theater kid. I was heavily invested in what would very, I think legibly be read as queer culture, these sort of iconic, like divas and people like from old Hollywood, like all of these things, like these are conversations that I engage with
Right.
all the time now with friends of mine who are, gay men, who, are interested in those things because like very much not all gay men are, right? And many straight men are. So like, it's not like an either or thing whatsoever, um, but there were elements of things that I obsessed with Judy Garland, obsessed, Liza Minnelli, obsessed, like all of that, all these things that are kind of like queer coded often culturally, were obsessions of mine before I ever met Devin ever. And so I think Boys Town was a very natural place for me to be because I had this immediate affinity with people, just because that was the language that I spoke, like there was a sort of like, common understanding and fit there, um, that I think culturally just made me feel at home, and made me feel, and I mean, and that's an interesting, like there are all these kind of studies and books about and stories about like straight women and gay men and their friendships and the sort of like the almost romantic undertones sometimes that aren't actually romantic but are sort of flirtatious or like, but also the safety of those relationships kind of for both parties. And there's a lot of psychology I think involved in that and all of that. But so I think there was some element of that as well. And just honestly, for me, like, I think there was an element of, I had brothers, I had a great dad. I think like I had great brothers, and I had great uncles, cousins who were like, I think I had very positive, like masculine experience, weirdly, I think, because now I like look around me and I'm like, oh my God, like guys, like what is wrong with you? But that wasn't my experience. I had very positive like experiences with men. And so I think that I, in many ways, identified more with the men in my life than I did with a lot of the women that I knew, in my life. And I wasn't as in touch with those parts of myself, except to sort of play them. Like I think I played femme very well, but that wasn't actually, I don't think I felt very connected to that part of myself. And I honestly still don't. Like that's a part of my own sort of identity that I'm still kind of working out. But I think that there's been a part of me that's always felt sort of a little bit more at home with boys, no matter how those boys identified, than I have felt sometimes with women. I have a lot of really close female relationships, like with women in my life. So it's not that I don't have, friends who are women, but just often from my own identity piece, I think I've often felt. And I also just, there were certain markers, like I was always more ambitious than a lot of the men in my life. I was always a little bit more driven. I was always, all these things that we kind of tend to sort of like code as masculine. I had a lot more of those than a lot of other people that I knew. So
We can probably assume, just based on the things that you've said, that this relationship served Devin because he could hide in this heterosexual relationship. He wasn't in touch yet with who he was. So he clearly loved you. I mean, you guys have been clear about that. There was a lot of health in the relationship through that connection. So
mhm,
why not just stay in it? There's love,
sure.
there's respect. We want to be together. So we can kind of get, how it served him because being out of the relationship kind of forced him to face who he really was, which is a hard journey for some, Um, so that served him that way. How did being in this relationship with Devin serve you from a codependent standpoint?
Codependently, I think that similar, honestly. It's like it's the shorthand of I'm married, and that what does that say about me? Well, it says that somebody loves me and somebody wanted me, and I therefore am wantable, and you should just know that about me. And I am settled, and I am happy, and I am collaborative because I can get along with someone in that way. And have a stable life. We pay rent, we pay gas, we pay, like all of that kind of stuff. Like, and more than that, right? That we read into that. I think, I'm sure there's 100 reasons, honestly, even after all of this, like thinking about this relationship that I've done that I'm not even aware of even now. But I think that those are pieces of it, right? And I think that the inverse of that is to be someone who was sexually rejected, to be someone who was perceived as plain, to be someone who was perceived as dumb, to be perceived as, single in your 30s or whatever, all of the stereotypes that kind of go with that. Those are all things that I did not want to be, right? And had to sort of like reckon with myself, like, oh, okay, well, what is this? Who am I now? Like, what trope am I now? If I was this trope before, what is my identity now? What are the things associated with it? And I didn't want to be those. So I think it's also that. It's like, what was I avoiding in staying? Some of that is certainly a component of it, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, I also just want to reflect for a minute on, I can't help but appreciate that your journey through this almost feels like a journey of becoming more tolerant
Oh, yeah.
to somebody who's different from you, to somebody who's that society, that he represents something that society has not always been accepting of. Portions of
hmm
society continue to be that way. How was this
hmm
a journey of you learning your own way of going from intolerance to tolerance?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the story of the book is really a story of learning to read. Like there's a chapter in the middle that's very pivotal. It's about the literary theory of deconstruction, which is Derrida, Jacques Derrida was the kind of the proponent of that. But essentially what it posits is that there is no one-to-one correspondence between a word and its meaning or a sign and its symbol, right? Like that sort of thing. Like the significance of the sign can be multi-layered, right? And so I think that for me, what that meant in terms of my faith or in terms of my perception of the world is that I think I came from a very much black and white way of viewing the world. Like, this is gay, this is straight, this is good, this is bad, this is this is that. And what deconstruction, in a literary sense, did for me as a human being. But my teacher, who is a dear friend of mine, now, but the sentence he got us to diagram to pick apart is "I love you." Like, what is the subject? What is, the verb? What is the object? What does each of those mean? What are a million other ways you could read that than the way that we typically read that? Like, and so it was rooted in this kind of unpacking of, I have always had these things, like this is normal, this is good, this is positive, this is what God means for us to be, and then this is all the other things that aren't that. And it broke that for me. But I think that for me, that's a huge part of the shift and the change that I underwent during that time, and that relationship brought about for me. 'Cause really, honestly, that relationship, and the main reason I think probably more than any other that I wanted to write the book is this is the most important relationship I will have, I think, in the sense that it made me who I am. Like, everything that I am proudest of in myself now would probably not have happened had that relationship not occurred.
And I have to think too that that process also had to have shifted the way that you approached religion and spirituality too.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you can't have that kind of a shift for tolerance and
Mhm.
deconstruction without also shifting that. And have you felt like you've landed in a good place with that uh, journey for yourself?
Yeah, I've kind of described myself as allergic to certainty. I think that's kind of become, honestly, like my path. I'm some flavor of agnostic at this point. The faith that I grew up in was so cognitive and cerebral, and so like, here's the the existential argument for the existence of God, and here is this argument for the existence of God, and you have to and here's all these like pieces of evidence for the historical Jesus, and all. I mean, it was just like constantly like prepping you for answers, like for definite answers, like hard answers, and you were sort of encouraged to question, but not really. And so I think all of that to say, like, I can't go back to that And I can't go back to that on the other side of it, right? Which is to be definitively atheist. Like, I have no interest in that.
Well, Kelly, it's been wonderful talking to you. Appreciate you sharing your experiences with us, and I really hope that this helps a lot of people out there who have had similar experiences.
Thanks. This has been great to talk. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So where can we find you online?
You can find me at kellyfosterlundquist.com. You'll also often find me over at Instagram with that
In
same
This Family
handle
is
at
presented by
Kelly Foster
Nexus
Lundquist.
Family Healing,
My
a
book is
national
available in print
nonprofit
at any
mental
place you
health
buy books,
organization.
but preferably
You
at
can
your
learn more
local
about
independent
Nexus and
bookstore.
how to support
Beard
our
is also
mission
available
at
in Libby at many local library
nexusfamilyhealing.org.
systems, and it
The
wouldn't
show
hurt
is
my feelings
produced by
one
John
bit
Ho
if you
with
request
music
it
from
should it
Jeremy
not already be
Messersmith.
available.
If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe, rate, and write a review. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray. See you next time.